everyone. Today we're going to be taking a look at another king of Judah, Joash. Now Joash was just a little baby when his daddy died, and he was due to become king, and he was only a baby. His grandmother didn't want that to happen. In fact, she wanted to be queen of the country herself, so she decided to hide little Joash away, and later on she planned to kill him. Joash's auntie heard about this plan that the queen had, so she came into the palace and took little Joash away. She took him to live with her and her husband Jehoiada. They both worked in the temple, and they planned to keep little Joash a secret for a long time. They hid him. They tried to keep him quiet whenever he cried. And I'm sure that was very difficult whenever he was just a little baby. But they managed to do that. And as he grew, they taught him about God. They brought him to the temple and they showed him how to love God just as they did. And this reminds me how sometimes boys and girls, we go to church with our mummies or daddies, or they send us to ARC, or they maybe send us to BB or GB, places where we can learn about God. But just because we learn about God in these places doesn't mean that we love God in the same way maybe as our mummies and daddies do, or even the helpers in church do. And it was just the same for Joash. Even though his auntie and uncle brought him to church and taught him about God, he didn't know God himself. Now, one day Jehoiada sent a message to all the heads of the families to come to the temple because he had something special planned. Joash was only 7, and the special thing that his uncle Jehoiada had planned was that he was going to get Joash crowned king of Judah. So all of these people gathered together, and little Joash got a crown put on his head. He got anointed with oil, and everybody cheered and celebrated. They were all so happy that little Joash had become king. Now Joash's grandmother heard all the cheering and long live the king, and she rushed to the temple and she saw what had happened. She saw Joash with a crown on his head, and she was so furious that she tried to kill him, but she was arrested and taken away. Joash needed help to be a ruler, to be a king. So he turned to his uncle Jehoiada and asked him for advice. Jehoiada gave him lots of really good advice that pleased God. And very soon the kingdom of Judah grew. The idols that people had worshipped were torn down. They decided that they wanted to repair the temple, and things were going well. People put money into a big chest which Jehoiada and his servant emptied each day, and they went and they bought wood and stone and lots of things to repair the temple. They even had enough money to buy some beautiful gold and silver dishes for the temple, which Joash's father had thrown away, and now they were back into the temple. Things were going well, and I can imagine that the people all thought that Joash was a really good king, a king who loved God and who served God. But unfortunately that wasn't the case. He was just doing as Jehoiada said, and Jehoiada was the one that loved God. And sometimes, boys and girls, we might look like we're Christians. We might do the right thing. We might make the right choices. But it's maybe not because we are making those decisions, but we're doing what we think other people want us to do. Joash still didn't love God himself. He just did as Jehoiada told him. Unfortunately, Jehoiada died. He was very old, 130 years old. But now Joash had no one to give him advice, so he went to some other people and asked for their advice. Now, he thought their advice was really good, and he thought that what he was doing was right. But they didn't love God the same way as Jehoiada did, and things started to go wrong. Things began to change. People began to worship idols again, and the temple just wasn't as important. God sent messages to warn Joash that he wasn't happy. He even sent people to tell Joash that he would be punished, as would the kingdom, if they didn't start to obey God. Zechariah, who was Jehoiada's son, went to Joash and pleaded with him to stop doing what he was doing and to listen and to do what God wanted to do. But Joash wouldn't listen. He wouldn't change his ways. And Zechariah told him that he would be punished. Joash ordered that Zechariah be taken away and killed. This man, who was probably like a brother to Joash, he had grown up in the same house as Zechariah. They had been probably playmates when they were just little. And now Joash had decided to murder Zechariah. The people were not pleased. God was not pleased. Joash had shown what he was really like. He didn't love God at all. In fact, he made very poor choices. And God did do something. Zechariah had warned Joash, but Joash hadn't listened. And before too long, the king of Syria had decreed a war on the land of Judah. Battles were fought, cities destroyed, terrible things were happening, and Joash didn't know what to do. He decided to go to the temple and to take the gold and the silver dishes from the temple and bring them to the king of Syria in the hopes of persuading him to stop this war. But before that could happen, Joash was injured in battle. He was brought home to the palace, and there he lay in bed. His servants looked after him, but there were some servants who were really angry at Joash. They weren't happy at the way he had been ruling their country for 40 years and how he had had Zechariah murdered. They decided it was time to get rid of King Joash. So they crept into his room and killed him. Now, this story doesn't have a happy ending. Joash did learn about God. Joash had a loving family. But he just hadn't made that decision to follow God himself. And perhaps if he had, then things would have turned out differently. It's the same for us. It doesn't matter whether our family believe in God or if we go to church. That isn't enough. We have to choose to follow God ourselves. And we can only make that decision for ourselves. I hope that you have made that decision to follow God. Now, this afternoon, your little activity is not a craft activity, but a little quiz. So in your pack, you will find a page that looks like this one, and it has some questions on it. Maybe your mummy or daddy could ask you the questions and you can choose the right answer and see how well you've listened to the story. I hope you have a good afternoon. Bye.
Great salvation, it's all about Jesus. Oh. Bring